Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. So today I got my Vespa Rally 200 from 1974 up on the lift, and I took it on a nice long ride, and I noticed the rear brakes are just not very effective. I think I have an idea what the problem is. My experience with vintage Vespa brakes, especially the older hub design, you know, before they went to the nice EFL PX design, is the hub seal will start leaking and contaminate the rear brakes with oil and grease. So not only am I going to go in there and replace the brake shoes, I'm going to replace the hub seal as well. So I'm all set up with the parts. Depending on the year and model of your Vespa, there's a couple different hub seals. There's a pretty common one, the 27 millimeter inside diameter hub seal. They went up to a 30 millimeter on the later years, and even some of the early ones were 30 millimeter. Typically the bigger hub design is going to be less prone to leaking. Another common issue is sometimes the hubs just come loose. It might be loose. I guess we'll find out. So let's get right to it. I'm going to get the cowl out of the way, get my spare tire out of here, and I have the scooter jack underneath the muffler with the front clamped. You need some means of lifting the rear tire. So there's many different ways to do it. Obviously the easiest way is have it clamped in a lift just like I have right here. Get the cowl out of the way. And I'm using a 13 millimeter. You can see I kind of have a non-standard little sealed battery setup on this scooter. There's actually really nice replacement batteries now from BS. I covered those recently. That's what I would probably run now, but that's just what I have in there set up. And I've even left the original flasher because everything's original, but I put electronic, more modern flasher to make it a little more reliable. So right here, the hub, and look what I just found. Doesn't help that I off-road this thing a lot. See how there's a little wobble? That's not uncommon, even though that center nut was probably torqued correctly. It's just loose. So we'll pop the grease cap off, and that certainly adds to the oil and leakage. And I can see oil in there, so I'm gonna have to clean that little cover. So we're gonna get the cotter pin out of here. And again, on the PXs, it was greatly improved upon to where they use a little castle nut cover. That's a much better design, but you know, I'm working with what they originally had on these old Vespas, where they put a cotter pin through a castle nut right there. So get the cotter pin out of the way, just throw that away, start with a new one. And if they're really stubborn, you could just cut them. But you can see everything's a little greasy and leaky. If all this stuff was tight, it probably wouldn't have been having a problem. But again, I kind of just noticed once the brake shoes are contaminated, they're pretty much done. So I got a 22 millimeter socket right here. Yeah, it's pretty loose. So didn't take any effort whatsoever. So with a 22 millimeter socket, normally you'd need somebody to stand on the brake or drop the scooter down where it puts some pressure on the tire, so you can loosen that, but everything's pretty greasy and oily. And we'll just rock the hub off. And I may even want to check the splines on the hub. I'd hate to replace this original hub on this scooter, but so it kind of slipped the tire out from under there. Actually not as much grease as I would have expected, but they definitely aren't working all that effective. So I put brand new brake shoes in there, and we're gonna clean this up. Be careful with something like a brake parts cleaner, because sometimes it will take the finishes, you know, the painted finishes off these outer things. I'm gonna clean it with a light duty water-based degreaser. I have a parts washer that has that fluid in it. I'll clean all these parts to get all that grease off them, and I'll come back with that. And then I'm gonna get some sandpaper. I'm gonna actually scuff the whole drum and get all this dust. And again, using a a water-based cleaner is a good thing because you don't really want to breathe that dust, especially if it's got the original brake shoes in there. They're going to have asbestos on them. You want to wash that away and not have that dust go airborne on you. So there's our brake shoes. Get right to servicing the brake shoes right here. They're not as contaminated as I was expecting them. I see a little bit on the bottom, but they certainly aren't all that effective. That's what I'm finding. And for doing the whole job, I find the diagonal plier, a large size diagonal plier, is one of the easiest tools. There's these Omega clips, and you can grab them pretty easily with a diagonal plier. If you distort them, just replace them. Part number is 000061. It's one of the first part numbers in the parts book because they've been using this part for so long. 2 ways to go about removing the brake shoes. You could step on this and get like a screwdriver and kind of lever the brake shoe off, and you get two screwdrivers, and you could usually lever one off. Another easy and dirty way to do it is if you're throwing away the brake shoes, you hit this with a punch right here, and you could just break the brake shoe casting, and it comes right off. That's another way to do it. But I'll try to be a little bit clean about, I got a screw under, so a flat screwdriver there, and you just kind of like lever it right off. So I kind of got the flat screwdriver between the cam and the brake shoes. I mean, I probably could sand those. They really aren't as contaminated as I expected, but brake shoes are really inexpensive. I'm just gonna clean everything up and start with a fresh set. And one thing to keep in mind is sometimes you need to take this whole mechanism apart and re-grease it. Sometimes you need to loosen your brake adjuster. Right now it's pretty, those brake shoes weren't all that worn out material-wise, so I don't think I'm gonna need to make an adjustment. We're gonna go ahead and replace that seal right there. And in here, I wouldn't hesitate to use like a brake parts cleaner, because that will kind of wash any of the brake dust or oil that's out there. Obviously wear some safety glasses. Just kind of wash that down, kind of clean that up. And this back plate, if you sometimes hear a metallic like swirling noise, it might be you have the back plates actually distorted and rubbing on the brake shoes. So that's something you may need to replace this. There's some rubber O-rings under there that you can service if you take this plate off. I'm not gonna mess with that today. And pretty much to take a seal out, it's kind of destructive. You just get a small screwdriver and kind of lever the seal out and just pop it right out. Doesn't look that bad, but we'll put a brand new one in there. Take like a reusable rag, just go ahead and clean this out because the oil is just on the other side. The PX is completely different. Actually, the oil seal is buried inside the motor. It's a much more reliable design. Probably wouldn't be dealing with this, replacing a seal like this often. So take something like the Maxima waterproof grease. Probably want to make sure your hands are pretty clean. And just a small amount of grease on that outside of the seal. And oftentimes you could just use 2 thumbs to kind of push it right in. And you don't want to push it all the way in. There's a little bit of a taper. I would say you go about 2 millimeters from the edge of the metal right here. Make sure it's pretty square, and you get pretty good control just pushing it in by hand. Don't need to tap it with sockets or anything. So it feels pretty even in there. I think we're pretty set. I'll be back and go ahead and clean the hub, and we'll put brake shoes on and get it all back assembled. All right, so I got everything cleaned up with pretty much the equivalent of some strong soapy water. And now I'm in here with a 80 grit emery cloth. And it's pretty important that you scuff up the drum. And also just look at it all the way around, because they do sometimes form cracks, and if you see cracks, probably best to replace this hub. This is the original hub to this Rally, it looks like. See the Piaggio symbol in there, and it Just looks to be an original hub. So just kind of go all the way around, scuff up that surface. It's kind of, the technical term is like deglazing the surface. So the new brake shoes will seat right in. And I don't really want to take any of the paint off, but I got a brand new or fairly clean rag. I'm going to spray some of that brake parts cleaner and just wipe the inside. And I'll do it a couple times until it's coming out pretty clean. So there's no residue that will contaminate the brand new brake shoes I'm going to install. So that's probably all we need to do. It's looking pretty clean now. Same with that surface that the seal is going to ride on. So we'll set that aside. And now you got some choices for the brake shoes. You can do the Italian original equipment, style brake shoes, made in Italy these are FA Italia. Sometimes we have the original Piaggio brake shoes. They still sell them. 072339 is pretty much all 10-inch rear, some of the fronts as well. But for a rally, a sprint, any of those, they'll take this. If you have an 8-inch scooter, there's 2 different types for the rear, or actually 3 different types for the rear. For the front, there's a couple different types. If you look at the exploded diagram, you can get the specific part. But maybe you want to do an upgrade, a little bit of an upgrade. There's the nice Malossi ones. There's supposedly a better compound. Also includes the spring, which is a nice touch there. The springs sometimes get a little distorted, especially when you remove them a few times. And that's 072339R for these brake power Malossi ones. I'm gonna go ahead and put the cool ones in there. Kind of taken away from my originality of my Vespa, but you don't see them. All I care about is they work better, so that's always a good thing, especially when the brakes work better on a vintage Vespa. That's a win in my books. So make sure your gloves are pretty clean. Get all those parts. Comes with a nice sticker. Made in Italy. So a couple things you want to check before you put these in. Doesn't really matter which side they go out, but make sure the spring goes through the casting. Sometimes I've had to use a little drill and clean the casting out. These are yellow painted, so I want to make sure they go onto the post. Yep, no problem there. So check both of those. And we're going to go ahead and kind of string that spring just like that. Set that aside. I'm going to put a real small amount of this real tacky Maxima grease on these pins right here. Very, very small amount, just to keep them from seizing up. You will find if you're taking apart like a vintage Vespa has been sitting for about 38 years, the brake shoes might be completely seized up onto those steel pins, because the brake shoes are made out of aluminum, and dissimilar metals, when they're not moving frequently, like in a scooter that's been sitting for 38 years in 3 feet of water in South Florida, you're going to have them seized up, and you're going to need to put a lot of heat. I think some of my prior videos where I've worked on like a full restoration, I might have covered. I know I've struggled on this project before, but that was several years ago. So I put the top one on. It's pretty easy. See the springs there, that little heel is dropped in, and then you see this little steel piece. I'm kind of hinging that on the outer round part of that cam right there, and then I just drop that right onto the pin, and then kind of equally push it. Sometimes just give it a little technical tap. And there you go. It's all on there. Just take our Omega clips. Oftentimes you just do those by hand. You push them. There's just a little slot in both of those brake pins. Snap those right in place. So I'm looking forward to having a little bit better braking performance. Believe it or not, on these vintage Vespas, a lot of times you get more braking out of the rear, which is kind of the opposite of what you'd expect out of a modern scooter, or definitely any modern motorcycle. You can get a ton of braking out of the front with the weight transfer, but these have such a weight bias towards the rear, you have like 70% of the weight of the rider sitting on it, or if you're a rider and a passenger, it's probably even more, and the engine in the back. So they're very lightweight in the front and kind of heavy in the front. So very different than motorcycles. So I tend to use a lot of rear brake. You always want to use a combination of both. So I got that tire all cleaned up. Very, very small amount of grease on this. You don't want to have any of that grease contaminate the brand new brake shoes. Also inspect the splines. They seem to be in pretty good shape, but if you run it with the hub loose, like this one was running with the hub loose a little bit because I did have it on a trip. You run it too long like that and you could end up with a worn out spline. Usually on the hub, oftentimes the axle is a harder material, so it ends up holding up a lot better. And usually you just gotta kind of get that right in place, like that. If you can't push the hub on, you may need to loosen your brake cable. And I'll show how to adjust the brake cable after this. So I'm gonna put this big thick washer, that's kind of the way they have that. Check it for cracks. Same with this nut, if there's any cracks or the threads are in bad shape. It is holding your rear wheel on, pretty important. Also, this is one torque that is pretty critical on the vintage Vespa. If you over torque it, I've witnessed it before on a scooter rally, literally 20 years ago, where the axle broke because that nut was over torqued. Maybe it had some other problem with the material, but I don't know. The axle broke and the rear wheel went up into the frame with somebody riding the scooter, and that's definitely not something that's fun to do. So I'm gonna actually lower the tire onto the ground here. So I'm kind of taking the weight is on there, and at this point I could put that big socket there. So I got a trusty torque wrench. It goes from like 10 to 100 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna go right up to about 60 foot-pounds, which I think is like 30 or 41 Newton meters or 40 Newton meters, somewhere in there. And it's gonna get you close because the goal here is you wanna line up one of those pegs to put a new cotter pin in. And obviously the torque sometimes isn't gonna put it in the right spot. So we're gonna start by torquing this to 60 foot-pounds and make sure the scooter's clamped. And let's see where we're at. So there's gonna be 2 sets of holes. So there's a hole going this direction and it's blocked by this, this little pin right here. And I see another hole going this direction, and I might be able to get a pin. And sometimes, ideally, you want to just torque it a little bit more if you can uncover one of the holes. In some cases, you may need to have it a little wider. You definitely don't want to go over 80 foot-pounds on that rear hub. You're gonna need a new cotter pin. 012789A, I think, is our part number for the smaller cotter pin. And look at that. I think I got a winner chicken dinner right here because the 60 foot-pounds got it right to where I want it. And this cotter pin is a little on the long side, but it will work just fine. So you kind of got to slide it through. Sometimes it kind of hits as it's pulling out. So you can get in there, kind of give it a little bend as you're pulling it through. There we go. And a couple ways you could skin the cat here is probably with the longer cotter pin. I just go all the way around like this. And I'm using the diagonals. Believe it or not, diagonals work really good for more than just cutting if you're careful with them. If I took my nice needle nose, I'd probably ruin my needle nose by trying to bend this cotter pin here. So, and then you could use them to kind of tuck that in there. Use them as a hammer sometimes. And then now we can put the little hubcap right on. Just give it a little technical tap with your fist. And that's pretty much replacing the brake shoes, torquing that center hub nut with the 22mm socket to 60 foot-pounds. If you have the larger axle on the very later bikes, like anything modern, you're more like 80 to 85 foot-pounds. You know, something even on any of the modern Vespas, or even something like a BV400. They're very similar design, but they're a little bit higher torque because they're a larger nut and larger threads. So now it feels all nice and tight. I think we're good right there. I'm gonna move on to the other side and check my brake adjustment. We know that I was able to get the hub on, so there's definitely some free play that needs to be adjusted out. So here's the brake pedal on a vintage Vespa, and here's how it works. There's a pivot pin right here, and nice simple mechanism. You see it pulls on the cable. It does have this little rubber boot. Doesn't kind of want to come with the cable, but oftentimes that rubber boot has been long missing. And right there is your brake switch. And you can see whenever I push down the brake pedal, the plunger comes out. So that's kind of a lot of free play, you know, right there to, you know, what is that going down? Like 30 millimeters, a little over an inch. It's dropping down. I could take a little bit of that out. I think preferably I want to engage, I like to rest my foot right here. And so I bring it up to about right there. So the way you adjust this is you're gonna go back to the rear. You could even adjust it right there if you wanna mess with a cable, but my adjuster's still got a lot of free play. Not gonna see what I'm doing, but you can see the brake cable. It's this big thick cable right here, that cable housing. And there's an adjuster with a lock nut. And I'm using an 11 millimeter combination wrench, and I'm just adjusting that adjuster. This is probably the best way if you just need to make small adjustments. If you need to make a much greater adjustment, I'd probably unloop this cable right here and loosen that big 13 millimeter right there on the cable clamp and make an adjustment that way. And oftentimes I like to kind of push it, and then you're able to actually just spin that adjuster on the inside by hand. You know, I'm kind of holding that, so I'm taking tension off the cable. And there's a lock nut on there, so I think I'm getting pretty close to where you always want to have some free play, because as the brakes heat up, they might take up more of that free play as things heat up. Probably go a little bit more. And also, it's pretty important that you take a look at all the cables too. If you see any fraying on where the cable clamps are, then your inner cables are at the end of their life. So now I think I got that in a good spot. I think that's pretty good right there. So it's also possible to make adjustment of this lever, the pivot point, by adjusting that switch. I'm just gonna leave it alone. Scooters like the small frame and the P200E, the PX125, they have a much nicer brake pedal assembly that's all integrated into frame. This is the classic style brake pedal that you find on all the older ones, with the exception of the small frame, PKs, PXs, and that sort of stuff. So you don't really see the mechanism. The downside to having an exposed mechanism is this pin sometimes gets a little corroded and rusted up. And I'd recommend some type of spray lubricant. There's a little hole in here where there's a pin. You could spray some grease in there and spray grease on that pivot pin, kind of allow it to soak in. If you took the whole mechanism apart, such as a restoration, then I'd just, you know, put some of that waterproof grease on there. Everything feels pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that lock nut, take the scooter on a test ride, and that's pretty much servicing the rear brakes on a vintage Vespa. I can tell you the front brakes, they usually last forever, like the life of the scooter, other than the hubs get out around, or you got a bent axle that causes them to wobble a lot, or worn out shock. Generally you don't service the front too often, but it's all pretty similar techniques. Some of them use a cotter pin in the front, some have a staked nut. So a little different. I've covered some of those probably in my much older videos, but thought I'd share that with everybody. If you're looking for parts to work on your vintage Vespa, you know where to go. ScooterWest.com here in San Diego. We stock all the parts you need for both your vintage Vespa and your modern Vespas. Whether you're doing a basic brake job or you want to accessorize the scooter, so it's a pretty awesome custom one-of-a-kind scooter. We'll see you on the next one. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com.